Welcome to another edition of Ask Isaiah. I'm Isaiah Rose. I'm with the freelance teacher, Doug Marola, a constant contributor. We recently spoke about the previous episodes of The Last Dance. The final two episodes aired this past Sunday, which wrapped up a riveting and captivating 5 weeks in which the world was starving for sports. The Last Dance documentary really, fed that need for sports. And in our previous conversation, we spoke about a myriad of things centered around that dynasty, the Chicago Bulls dynasty of the 90s and Michael Jordan. And we kind of tapped into something that we were going to allude to on this episode, which was the importance of Jerry Krause and how that dynamic influenced so much. So, did you get a chance to watch the final two episodes?
I certainly did, and I think it's one of the Jerry Krause angle is a fascinating one if it represents what happened with that. What is really quite an amazing sports dynasty when you think of sports dynasties in general and what's happened with that franchise since then.
Right.
But very quickly, because the rap was always that Jerry Krause drafted everybody on that team except Michael Jordan,
right,
which was kind of an interesting twist at the guy. But also, I don't think we mentioned it at the end of the last one. We might have talked about it off camera, but it was almost like obscene buffoonery watching. I think it was Rod Thorne's a solid basketball guy, but watching him say, I believe it was Thorne, after they drafted Michael Jordan in 1984, oh, I wish he were 7 feet tall. He's not. So we'll make do with what we've got. Like the ethos of the NBA at the time was this maniacal obsession with getting the next Wilt, Elvin Hayes, Bill Walton, Moses Malone, right? Ralph Sampson. It was this obsession with, if you can draft the top flight 7-footer, Sam Bowie, number 2 pick right in front of Jordan, then you have saved the franchise and you will reach the promised land. And it's so strange to hear that now, that it's almost like they had that. It was in one of the earlier episodes because
right.
they went back in time when he got drafted, and hearing that was exceedingly weird. I mean, I remember I was 12 in 1984. I was in 6th grade. And so, I remember those days. I was into sports, not fanatically like I was later, but I was, passively following, a little boy in New York City, following stuff, playing basketball in the schoolyard. But that was a bizarre thing to hear in 2020.
Well, when you think about it, I think that a lot of that has to do with the importance of Bill Russell. And just how dominant that Celtics team was. You can even go before Russell and look at George Mike and this idea that the big man anchors the middle. We spoke about it in a previous episode, just the importance of defense. Defense wins championships. So you want to anchor the middle. If you look at all of the bigs you named, Wilt was a solid defender, but he was really, committed to, dominating statistically, regardless of offense or defense. But I think the focus of the interior really comes from that. This idea that you have to run the offense through the big, it really stems on stabilizing the offense, but you still need the perimeter player for that to happen. You still need Magic Johnson for Kareem. You still need Oscar Robertson for Kareem to win the championship. Kareem being there and Kareem, establishing a force inside is important, but you still need the perimeter player to get him the ball. But when you look at what Larry Bird did, what I said Oscar, what Jerry West did, what Magic did, this idea that you can't build around perimeter players. I don't necessarily. I understand where it comes from because the titans of the league and the faces of the league at the time were bigs, but you still always had dominant perimeter players. So then when you transition to the 80s, and Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, these are the faces of the league. Like, not just of their team, but of the entire league. So you still had the Jack Sigmas, you still had Hakeem, you still had obviously as the generation grew, Patrick, Charles Barkley, these bigs are there, but the perimeter player is always the staple. And to your point about Rod Thorne, Thorne at the time, they say also when they introduced Michael Jordan, to the team and how great he is, he gets a call from an assistant coach that lets him know you didn't mess this draft up. You get what I'm saying? This idea that you heard Frazier and all these guys saying that they don't expect a one-man team in the NBA. Michael Jordan is beyond the realm of what you can conceptualize as a player. They didn't really believe that he can be as dominant as he was coming in, averaging 28 as a rookie. That's not rookie numbers,
Right.
But what Krause was able to do, which I think he did get credit as he did get credit throughout, but they always had to put it together in the end of what they would say as well. He couldn't get out his own way. As great as he is, he couldn't get out of his own way. I think a lot of that just had to do with him needing to acknowledge that he needs credit, And in reality, he did get credit. Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan, all these guys, John Paxson throughout the documentary pointed out all of the great things he did in terms of just his moves and understanding what Michael needed as compliments. They got the shooters around him, Paxson, Hodges, eventually Steve Kerr, Tony Kukoc. These things are all Krause. But his need for the acknowledgement is what really did him in.
Yeah, and I think the main thing is, and I was surprised by the Pippen backstory, how difficult a path he had.
Right.
Basically a nothing high school basketball player, equipment manager as he was as a freshman at Central Arkansas. I don't know where Central Arkansas is. I don't know what their mascot is. I don't know their colors.
Right. You don't even know if there's still a program.
Yeah, I could tell you who started at center for the Washington Bullets in 1984. I can't tell you anything about Central Arkansas, right? Is it still a school? I have no clue.
Right.
So he equipment manager, difficult, but tragic. I mean, there's tragic growing up with his father and his older brother. That's rough. Something like one of 12 children. And Pippen building himself up to a first-round draft pick. And again, Jerry Krause, I mean, the trade today looks ridiculous. It's, it's Nolan Ryan for Jim Fregosi type stuff, where you have basically Scottie Pippen, the rights to draft Scottie Pippen for Olden Polynice, a B-lister big man in the NBA. And maybe it's part of the 7-foot obsession because Olden was 7 foot. In a good year, he'd have, 9 points and 10 rebound average. That was the best year of his life with Seattle. But that to have the guts to draft somebody like Scottie Pippen, who really was the linchpin. After looking at it, I have newfound respect for Pippen. I always thought he was a little overrated and had a little bit of the Jordan dynasty aura around him. But for Krause to have the guts and faith in his own system and his own scouts and his own, I mean, it was his reputation on the line. If Pippen were a bust, right, a guy in way over his head, former equipment manager, he would have never heard the end of it and probably been fired. And that's a real testament to him, in my opinion.
It's twofold in this respect, right? All of those things can't happen in terms of the risks he took and just really building around that team if you don't have the foundational piece of a Michael Jordan. If you look at, when you look at the final 2 episodes, you get to see, Dennis Rodman. He blows off a practice during the finals to go fulfill an engagement with the WWF at the time. Now they're the WWE.
Yeah.
No, not even not even WWF, WCW, and
Yeah.
Hogan and those guys.
The junior varsity
Right.
upstart wrestling thing. Yeah.
So you go you deal in that dynamic and how Phil and Michael manage that team. The foundation of Michael Jordan allows for Krause to be able to do what he does because he knows, regardless of how bad or how difficult things might be, I know that I have the greatest athlete at the time just really dominating. So I can
Hmm.
do things and tinker with things.
Hmm.
So that being said, the way that Phil and Michael managed the team allowed for a lot of stability in ways that Krause didn't have when as great of a GM as he is, once those two pieces left, especially Michael Jordan, now everything is stripped down to the bone and he's tasked with rebuilding a team without ever finding that piece in Michael Jordan.
And
So,
I think that's maybe what he wanted to do.
right.
We are going to strip it down. I mean, because let's face it, the next year was the lockout year,
Mm-hmm.
the 50 game season, and you had everybody gone from that Bulls team.
Literally, like the only players left are Randy Brown,
Mm-hmm.
Tony Kukoc, you know.
Right. And they were terrible. I mean,
Right.
they were just awful. And they draft Eddie Curry and Tyson Chandler and, these guys. And I think the idea was to rebuild from scratch and say, look, I can do it again. I can find these people in the draft. And what's going to happen is you're going to see a resurgence. And I can do it. I don't need to have that one piece in place to fall back and just build around. I can start from scratch, and it didn't work. The Joakim Noah, Derrick Rose Bulls were the kind of the closest he got to it to some degree.
No, but even that's after him.
When did Krause finish with the Bulls? Were the Noah Derrick Rose Bulls were not Krause as GM? I didn't look it up beforehand.
Yeah, that's not him.
Then Krause after Jordan gets an F because Curry was a bust. Tyson Chandler, nifty player. I like Tyson Chandler's game, but he's not the rock you build a team around, and he never became a super duper star at all.
Right.
He probably made an all-star team or two.
This is for Noah.
For Tyson Chandler.
Tyson won Defensive Player of the Year with the Knicks. He ended up winning a championship
with
the
Dallas.
Mavs.
Right.
But it took him a while to round into shape.
Yes.
Like to find his niche within the league.
Right.
But again, that just goes to show you how difficult it is to find a player, because even Derrick Rose, like as much as those years of prominence the Bulls had, it was very fleeting because you saw how sensitive and how taxing it is to really maintain. He ended up breaking down in 3 years.
Yeah.
So to find a Michael Jordan, that's not even a once in a generation talent. That's like lifetimes worth of a player of his capability. You only get Mike Magic, Bird. The Celtics, as great of a franchise as they are, they still haven't found a way to really capture what they had in the 80s and even in the 60s with Bill Russell.
Right. And that's why I think it's unfortunate that the Krause legacy is so kind of ruined by the human, the flaw. I sound like it's a philosophy channel here, but the flawed human condition. It sounds like a Shakespearean play almost.
Yeah, he was actually, not to cut you off, he was done in 2004.
Okay. Right. Okay. So you see, the egos and the human, the pride, right? One of the 7 deadly sins, getting in the way of doing and having more success, because you have Krause drafting Pippen, brilliant. Horace Grant, the perfect puzzle piece. Picking up little things, even somebody like Randy Brown in the second series of 3 titles, 96, 97, 98. I remember Randy Brown was a a guard with the Sacramento Kings, didn't start every game, maybe every other game, good defender, filled a hole, right? Played his role well, didn't complain. He wasn't, I mean, you had to be an NBA fan to know who Randy Brown was.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the documentary with, who am I thinking of? He went to UConn and was a backup forward for the Bulls.
Burrell.
Scott Burrell, right? UConn star, was a star with the Hornets, wore out probably, I think he might have gotten hurt, backup forward with the Bulls. Krause put those pieces in place. There was something good. There's something positive about that. And then to have it all end like just a window slamming shut because of ego and personality conflict, looking back on it, it's baffling that that's how it went down.
But that only happens, the reason why it happens the way that it does is because they are so successful. If you look at, like, Bob Myers mentioned it, in watching it, him and Steve Kerr, they said that, especially Steve Kerr, he said that watching The Last Dance only reinforces what he told the Warriors that final year together. When you are trying to sustain something, obviously when you chase a championship, it's the hardest thing to do. But when you have it and you're able to be successful over a substantial period of time, to maintain that and still keep, solid relationships is very, very difficult. Because behind the curtain, there's so much that goes on once you win. Everybody feels that they're not more valuable than they actually are, but sometimes, to your point about the ego, it gets in the way of uh of keeping everybody within a sacrificial type of mentality. When you have Dennis Rodman averages 5 points a game. He gets 18 rebounds a game.
Yes.
But he has arguably one of the biggest egos in the history of the game. How do you, not in the sense of the game itself, he's
Right.
he's willing to sacrifice, but in terms of just attention and how much you have to deal with him, how much you have to manage him. You look at the Warriors and how Draymond Green, he's always on the edge of being a great leader or a detriment. These are things you have to really make sure that you coddle and manage the right way. So when you win consistently in the fashion that you do, when it ends, it never ends well. And for fans that didn't get to see the Bulls lose, especially during that era, with Michael Jordan at his apex, you always left longing to wonder, who could have been the ones that knocked them off.
Yeah, because you have the eternal question of those Rockets teams, put them at their best. Probably the second one that had Clyde Drexler on it. And, and have them play Chicago because the Rockets had the thing that Chicago didn't, and they had the elite center in Akeem Olajuwon, who basically could do whatever he wanted. And that was the Chicago, the team that did not have the big guy, that did not have the dominant 7-footer. I mean, I know they'd throw Luke Longley and Bill Wennington and these guys at, Scott Williams. They'd throw lots of big dudes at Olajuwon. He'd shoot 25 free throws. He'd make 21 of them. That's 20 points there. He'd score 20 to 25 to 30 points just in regular baskets. So he's going for 40 to 50 a night, probably. I mean, it would have been an interesting matchup. But going back to Krause real quick, and I wish they had spent more time on it in a couple of episodes ago, is when they picked up Rodman. Because remember, they didn't have Grant in 95.
Right.
And it showed. So they pick up Rodman, but Rodman was with the Spurs for 2 years.
And burnt out.
And you thought it was going to be great because, David Robinson was, again, dominant at the top of his game, a monster of a force, fantastic basketball player, and super athletic.
They couldn't manage the personality.
No, I mean, David Robinson is a devout Christian. And when he retired, he opened up a school, a Christian school for young children. Dennis Rodman changed his hair color and partied like a like there's no tomorrow.
Right.
Literally, it sounds like. So they're two totally different people. Rodman was seen as a clubhouse cancer in San Antonio. And the Bulls and Krause, I'm sure he talked with Reinsdorf and these guys, but he said, yeah, we could get Rodman. And the fact that we are established and we've got these megawatt superstars in Pippen and Jordan and a track record of ridiculous levels of success, that will keep the focus with Dennis in play. Like it'll keep him from completely going off and random, and it worked. And people don't understand how huge a risk. I remember when I heard that Rodman was going to the Bulls, I'm like, now this is going to be interesting. And I remember thinking about a Rodman Jordan clash, that it could have been like dropping an atom bomb in the locker room.
Well, to your point about the timing thing, I think that Michael was a lot more mature the second three-peat. I think so much of what was happening from 87 to 93, he wasn't solo-centric, because obviously they figured out how to win as a team, but his attitude towards certain things might have been different at a younger age. So when you get a more mature Jordan who had to go a year and a half without the game, he's appreciating it a lot more. And then to come back and to lose to the Magic in the way that they did, so now, not only to your point about the missing piece of Horace, but once you get Dennis in the fashion that they did, they had to do a whole meeting with him and Scotty. He had to apologize to Scotty. A lot of different things had to happen before he even signed with them, which they didn't necessarily touch on in that regard too.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't mention the meeting between Dennis and Phil, but that was more so them establishing a relationship. But in terms of establishing the dynamic with Dennis, once Michael sees Dennis there, his whole mission now is to win at all costs again. So he along with Phil and Scotty will manage as much as possible just to make sure they keep it together. Going back to your point about just how Krause built everything, the teams that the Bulls always faced in the playoffs always had great big men. You look at those Cleveland teams with Brad Daugherty, the Knicks with Patrick Ewing and Oakley on the interior. They played Phoenix in the finals. You play Seattle with Sean Kemp, who was a great big. You got Karl Malone in Utah, who they addressed in episode 9 and 10, along with Indiana and Rick Smits, who's not the most dominant, but he's definitely a presence.
He was a piece they didn't have. A 7'4" guy with soft hands who only played 27 minutes a night, yet would still score 18 points. Right. They didn't have an answer for that.
So, but the one thing I will say that they did have to their advantage, while their bigs weren't offensive, they were defense oriented to a point where that's all they had to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that is what made, along with Scotty and Michael on the perimeter, Ron Harper as well. But I think that when you tell your bigs, Stacey King, Cliff Livingston, Winnington, all these guys, Longley, Purdue, all I want you to do is focus on defense, hustle, get every rebound. Now that takes pressure off them offensively, so now they can generate all their energies to making sure that this guy doesn't kill. Even if they're going to get outscored. Look at Patrick Ewing. Patrick's going to score. He's going to get his numbers. But is he going to shoot efficiently? Is he going to be effective enough to make – is he going to be dominant enough to make up for the effects of others like Starks or, let's say, a Hornacek or John Stockton or Brian Russell? Yeah, Karl Malone's going to score 37 one game, but in totality for a series, is he going to be dominant enough to make up for what Brian Russell is not going to do? That is where the Bulls' opponents never really were able to get it together. Now, I think that Hakeem is the most skilled big they would have faced, but I think that they, as a team and as a as a defense, the Bulls faced enough bigs to where they could put up a game plan together to face Hakeem.
The and I think that's why you see in the Eastern Conference, the first run, the first triple, the Cavs were there. That 92 Cav team was really good, gave them fits in the regular season. And then again at the 1998 Eastern Conference Finals against the Pacers, those I don't think it was Jalen Rose or Miller just talking trash. I think it's legitimate that they thought they had a chance to win with Dale Davis and Antonio Davis. And remember, Antonio Davis came off the bench. This is a 6'10" wrecking ball, built like a bodybuilder. He came off the bench. He backed up Dale Davis, that Derek McKee, he's 6'10", great defender. Rick Smits, 7'4", who basically would turn around and flip in buckets.
Right.
So tall. And, they Reggie Miller doing what he does. That Pacer team with Larry Bird as the coach, they did have a chance. It's one of the great things. Yeah, it's one of the great things about the documentary is that you look back at the numbers and you look back at the records. You're like, oh, they were dominant. They beat everybody. It was just a blowout and game over. It wasn't hope and irrational to think that like I mentioned last time, Seattle, I thought they had a chance just as a basketball fan, but that I forget how rugged that Indiana team was, and neither Miller nor Bird were scared. They weren't going in nervous.
Well, the thing too, you got everything had its time, right? So when the Pistons beat the Celtics in 88, you got to think about the run that the Celtics were on at that time.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 7-year window, 81 to 88, where the Celtics go to the finals 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
No, pardon me, they go to the finals 5 times. They win 3.
Yep.
So during that window of time, you're breaking. Not only you're winning, but you're breaking down slowly but surely. When the Pistons finally beat the Lakers in 89, that's a 10-year window, in which the Lakers at that time go to the finals 8 times. So it's more so the war of attrition and timing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when the Pacers faced the Bulls in 98, we're speaking about the climate of the team and the whole Krause dynamic and how they're dealing with all this drama internally. This is from not just 91 to 97, but really 88 to 97, when the Bulls are challenging for a championship contention.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a 10-year window and 5 championships where you're like, this might be the time.
Mm-hmm.
So for the Pacers, who are budding in terms of championship contention, they're chomping at the bits to get their shot. So for them to believe that, it was a timing thing also. You mentioned the team, the way that they're built. That's actually Larry's first year with the team, so they have a whole new energy. They're coming away from Larry Brown. They're one of the top tier teams in the East again, but just in terms of how fluid the offense is, how they're using Jalen Rose now as a 6-man, to be able to create as a playmaker. You still got Mark, you still got Reggie, but it's a whole different energy there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that their confidence, the Pacers' confidence, was in the right space to be able to knock off a team in the Bulls who had reigned supreme over the league for an extended period of time.
And they should have tried to hold on for 2 more years, because those 3 years that Bird coached, remember year 3, the Pacers played in the finals against the Lakers.
Going, yeah.
Right. And the Lakers were handed the title because Portland Trailblazers with Scottie Pippen got completely robbed. I'm going to say it. They got robbed by the league and the refs in that fourth quarter. And Portland really, in my opinion, should have gone to the finals. The Lakers get handed that Western Conference title, go to the finals. But that Portland team had Pippen on it. And the Pacers made it to the finals. And that by then they've got Jalen Rose at the starting shooting guard.
Mm-hmm.
Larry Bird, remember Larry Bird, elegant in his simplicity. He had a defensive coach and an offensive coach. Now you look at the list of assistants, there's like 6 or 7 guys. Bird had 2.
Right.
He had Harder and he had Carlisle. And that's it. That was his entire coaching staff. It's amazing to watch the huddles in the last dance when they're playing the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals. It's Bird, 2 assistants, and the team. And that's it. And so the Bulls had Krause, going back to Jerry Krause, had he been able to say, all right, I'm going to let you run it until someone beats you. We're not going to beat ourselves. They would have done 2 things. They would have gone up against a stronger Indiana team. We would have seen if those Pacers could have been able to pull it off. And let's not forget, let's say they could get past Indiana. Quite possible. The rise of the Spurs. Now you're talking basketball nirvana. Now you're talking about a very young Tim Duncan. Remember, Robinson was there for the first title in '99, and then again the second one in '03. And they would have met. Those 2 teams would have met, and that would have been interesting to see how that would have gone. But we'll never know because, like you said, the Krause dynamic really played a strong role. It's a unique, like the Spurs. I think the Spurs dynasty is over. They had an amazing 20-year run, 5 titles. You just rarely see that. That's like the Yankees of basketball. But it's kind of a natural end, right? It's a slope downward.
Right.
They make the mistake with Kawhi Leonard. Whoops.
But even then, that's kind of how a dynasty's end, though.
Yes, exactly.
The initial core of Duncan, Duncan Robinson transitioned great into Duncan, Ginobili, and Tony,
right?
Which was a decade strong,
right? And a zillion role players who were perfect for their roles at the time, from Malik Rose to Danny Ferry to Steve Kerr. The list, right. Oh God, the list is endless. Yeah.
Right. So now that's 2 generations worth of dynasty, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then, I mean, Duncan to me is arguably the greatest franchise player of all time.
We have to do that podcast in the next couple of days.
Right.
That's a good question. Yes. And I think you're probably right.
In terms of the timing. And
yes.
20 years to be able to build around one player and maintain sustainability for so long. Right. You know, he doesn't. Now the Spurs don't have the peaks of, let's say, of a Lakers with Phil or obviously Jordan. Nobody's gonna have those peaks.
Right.
But to be able to sustain for a substantial period of time of 20 years.
20 years.
No franchise can really say that.
Yeah, and a natural ending, like you said, a natural ending. That's a great way to put it. A natural ending, and this with Krause and Reinsdorf and Jordan, and all of the craziness. Sounds like there's yelling and screaming on the bus and foolishness. A very unnatural ending with the Krause dynamic.
I want to say this too about Jerry. I think it's more so him being an antagonist within this whole thing was more so how much of it is valid versus how much of it is drawn up in their mind for them to be successful. Like more so they needed it for motivation more so than he actually was a villain, if you get what I'm saying. Like how much of it is he actually was a villain versus Michael and Pippen and Phil needed that to consistently push themselves. I think that for everything that he was, and I mean, from a PR perspective, you look at some of the things he said throughout this documentary, it just was horrible. Like the timing of the things he would say, you would be like, why are you saying this right now? Even if internally, you speak one-on-one with Reinsdorf and you say, listen, man, we've been around the block 5 times already. This is a 10-year window. We got to start to really transition. We might have to strip things down and try to rebuild. Those are things you say internally. You don't do it so flagrant and publicly the way that Krause did it. But I think that he himself had to publicly do it so that he wouldn't back out of it, if you get what I'm saying. You do it publicly so that you have to hold yourself to that standard. If I'm saying it's over to Phil, if I'm saying this is Phil's last year, I have to stand firm to that. Because even in 97, they mentioned it. That was supposed to be Phil's last year too.
Mm-hmm.
And, Reinsdorf said, listen, we got 5 chips. Mike wants to pass Magic. We got to run it back at least one more time.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes to Phil. Phil signs a 1-year deal. So then they win in 98. And Reinsdorf says to Phil, listen, you want to come back? So it's like the same song and dance. Like, you're going to go through this every year throughout the year just to get to the end, win, and say, oh, you want to do it again? So for Phil knowing that, he said, we got to cut it clean. I'm not rebuilding.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be fair to Jerry because Jerry wants that moment. He wants to have that moment outside of Michael, Phil, and Scotty. So we got to give him that. Let's see what he could do. He only lasted 6 years, but that goes to show you how sensitive that window is. You gotta maximize it while it's there.
Which they did. Which
Right.
Their record is the case. And your point about not, what are you going to say in public? What are you going to say to the press? When are you going to say it?
Mm.
It's a shame it didn't go differently because Krause picked Phil Jackson out of the CBA as a tie-dye shirt wearing, straw hat having hippie weirdo.
Right. But not just him. Doug Collins, Tex
Yes,
Winter, he put all of that.
He put all that together and put Jackson there while Collins was still the head coach,
Right.
and made it work.
Right.
Right. I mean that's Phil Jackson in his book is pretty fair. I read it a while ago, but if I remember correctly, it's pretty fair because he was a kind of a vagabond as a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And never, Krause said, he gave him an interview and Jackson shows up with a feather in his cap and a big collar, and they interview, it goes nowhere. And Krause later on, I think a year or two later, says, look, come back. And Jackson had won the CBA title.
Right.
In Albany.
Right.
And says, look, come back, put on a suit, look presentable, and I'll get you in as an assistant. He knew that Jackson was going to work as a coach. And let me tell you, it's not like people were ringing up Phil Jackson, oh, please take over our franchise. You're the missing coaching piece. That wasn't happening.
Right.
So for Krause to do that is amazing.
And this is where I always give, they don't necessarily give him this credit. I mean, I think after the documentary, there's been a lot of pushback in terms of his leadership style and making players better, like in the fashion that he did compared to, let's say, Magic.
You mean Jackson making players better?
No, Michael Jordan.
Oh, Jordan. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm gonna tie it into Phil too, but I'm just saying I give Michael a lot of credit because as a player of his stature, when Phil comes in, Michael is a MVP. He's a defensive player. He's a defensive player of the year. By the time Phil is head coach, which is 89, 90, Michael is a 5-time scoring champion. I mean, in terms of an individual player, he's done everything you possibly can to be an all-time great at that point.
Yeah, he's God disguised as Michael Jordan.
Right. So for him to align himself with Phil, so much of Phil matured knowing that he had Michael as a foundation. So to Phil's credit, and he does get the credit of, balancing the Chicago offense. But I think Phil matured under that window of scrutiny with Michael in a way that helped him once he went to LA. In LA, no one ever questioned the things that he did. They didn't need to because he was already proven. He won 6.
Good point.
Right? But with Michael, that's Phil's time to tinker with things. I might make a mistake, but I don't have to worry because I got Michael Jordan.
Right.
And even after that first 3, right, where Phil really gets his wings is that 94 season. because there's no Michael Jordan. You still have to sustain this group here. Not only does he have a great season, they win 55 games. They compete against a team that eventually went to the finals with the Knicks. The Knicks did win, but he got game winners from Tony Kukoc. They pushed the Knicks to 7.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of exceeding expectations, they definitely did that. So as a coach, he proved himself in ways that once he got outside of the Bulls, which is 98, 99, 99, 2000, he didn't have to be questioned anymore. So I think for Michael, as a player, I give him a lot of credit from a leadership perspective because it's Phil in him. While Phil is the one, making sure he manages the personalities and no one, who's the one that they have to live up to? Who's the standard that the players have to live up to? That's Michael Jordan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So from a leadership perspective, I always give Michael that edge there.
And while you were talking about it, I remember thinking that when Jackson comes in and starts talking about the triangle, to sell the triangle
Mm-hmm.
from you have an older guy, Tex Winter. He did not want to be the head coach, right? But Krause is like, look, Jackson, you're going to learn from this guy. Tex Winter is a basketball genius. Right. This is all Krause doing. He's a basketball genius. Follow him. Follow his plan, because Collins wasn't going to. Tex Winter was there, but they weren't getting along. It showed in the documentary. Tex Winter wasn't even on the bench.
Right. Doug.
He exiled him.
Doug understood Michael at that age.
Yes.
Being young and wanting to prove yourself to the level that Mike did.
Right.
He needed that control. He needed the ball. And Doug was willing to give him the ball.
Right.
And Doug spoke about it. It's more so about 86 to 89. That version of Michael Jordan is so hell-bent on establishing Michael Jordan that it might have came at a detriment to the team sometimes.
Well, that was the chatter. The chatter. I remember those days very, very well.
But when I say more so a detriment to the team, I'm saying it more so in terms of their confidence. I still believe that Michael Jordan would have won championships with Doug Collins. If it's Michael Jordan, Doug Collins, and Scottie Pippen, they probably win championships.
Well,
they might not win 6.
Right.
But they still win championships.
And the key name that they say there is Pippen.
Right.
Because the Bulls don't win anything without Pippen. Right. And that's an interesting point. Collins, Jordan, and Pippen, the real name, well, hard to say Jordan, not the real name, but all things being considered, the Pippen angle with the defense and the rebounds and the passing and the all-round game, and he'd never needed to lead the team in scoring, all this kind of stuff, that you are correct, that they would have won a title with Doug Collins as coach, because Pippen was there and he had completely expanded and grown and flowered as a player.
Right. I truly think sometimes when you talk about championships and dethroning certain teams, it's all about going through those growing pains and being there at the right time. The Bulls, up until that point, they did lose in 89 to the Pistons, but they pushed the Pistons to 6 games. So it's not like they didn't have the previous experience of 88. 88, they played the Pistons. They lost 4-1. You play the Pistons again in 89, you lose 4-2. So I think as time would have went on, they would have figured it out. Pippen, Horace, and those guys, they had to get tougher, which playing the Pistons, you're only going to get tougher. So I don't think that, Doug was in the wrong in the way he coached the Bulls. It was just more so about timing.
Yeah. And these little things, right? Like the question of, does Collins win a title, and these other unanswered questions. The fact that Jackson comes in, says we're going to do the triangle. Jordan bought into that. These little things. There are a lot of cases where, especially with the NBA as it went through the 1990s, you have Jackson coming in saying, "Look, Tex Winter, I'm gonna follow this. This triangle idea is fantastic, and it will work." And if Jordan said, "You don't get it. the Chicago Bulls and the Jordanaires, right? It's
Right. It's
Michael and the
right.
Jordanaires, which is what, those years. It was my last years of high school, beginning of college, especially. I graduated high school in 1990, so it was like Michael Jordan and nobody knew.
Who again?
Yeah, exactly. What?
Right.
Ennis Watley,
Yeah.
Rory Sparrow.
Right.
Did
Right.
these
Right.
names mean anything to anyone? They didn't, because people didn't know. I mean, I knew when Oakley came to the Knicks, I was happy about it, but I knew he played for the Bulls, and that's about it,
But
because
see,
all anyone talked about was Jordan.
all up until that point, though, I feel like for any great player, they have to get that out of their system,
Yes.
just in terms of being individually great, and you have to get all of that out of your system to prove to you that you can't win individually.
Right.
For that Bulls team, they were having success. I think that a lot of people misconstrued what was happening with the Bulls in the 80s. 87, 88. They're winning 50 games in 88. They're pushing in 89. Like, so they're in you know a playoff contention mode. They're not bottom dwellers before Phil gets there.
Mm-hmm.
Phil comes in at the right time to take them over the top. And I think more so than anything, the difference between Michael Jordan and a lot of players is, and I think Phil taught, Shaq and Kobe the same thing. Once you win, you can't give it back. You got to defend it. You got to win and be so dominant to the point where when somebody comes and tests you for your crown, you're really established in how you defend it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you got to give Phil ultimate points, because every time he won, he defended it.
Yeah.
And Michael was in tow with that. So I think his loyalty to Phil came from that. Like, we're in this together. We spearhead this. Me, you, and Scotty, we're here the whole way.
That togetherness and that unity was fantastic to see. I like it that they went. I like it that they bounced back and forth in time.
Right.
It did make me feel hard to feel sorry for some of these guys, right? Because they're multimillionaires and they play sports for a living. It's great, but for the Jazz, who got there for the last two,
Right.
I mean, Stockton and Malone were fantastic. I don't think people realize that the Jazz in 1998, they beat the Duncan Robinson Spurs.
Mm-hmm.
They beat the Olajuwon Rockets.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they had Barkley then.
Right.
I'm not sure.
That's the 97. Yeah.
Yeah. So that last so Duncan Robinson Spurs.
That Duncan. That's 98.
Yeah, I'm talking about the 1998.
Oh, you're talking about 98. Okay.
98. That second year that they made it. They
Right,
go
right.
through San Antonio with Duncan and Robinson. They go through the Rockets, and then they go through the Kobe and Shaq Lakers. And think of those three teams. And then they go and play the Bulls. And so these guys, right, Stockton and Malone, get to the finals 2 years in a row, meet the megawatt supernova Bulls twice. And all of those years, I mean, what did Stockton and Malone play together? 18 years, something like that? I mean, you talk about sports dynasties that did everything except win a title. It's the Utah Jazz,
Right.
and with Greg Ostertag at center. Right. I mean, it's really something else. You watch those teams and you see how good. I like it that Bob Costas said, Stockton gets the rebound and throws the most perfect pass he'd ever seen. I think it was Costas who said it.
That was David Aldridge.
Oh, was it Aldridge?
Yeah.
Well, he's right, because I was watching that game and I'm like, Stockton's, floating around the baseline, gets the rebound.
That was on a rope.
Up, yeah, looks up, and there's no thought involved with that. That was, I've been playing with this guy. I'm the postmaster general. There's the mailman, and I can do this. And it wasn't like Doug Marola running down the court with his friends, pounding that Budweiser. It was, if I remember correctly, it was Jordan Pippen down there. He threads the needle full court, and Malone goes in for a layup, just like that.
Basket.
It's amazing.
In his bread basket, he didn't even have to stretch too long. He just caught it right.
he didn't have to break stride or stagger his steps. Man, that was artistic, and they did not win a title. Those Jazz teams and Stockton and Malone are really something else. Now, you because I want to go for about another 20 minutes, but you binge watched. Do I have this correct? Did you binge watch the whole series?
Yeah.
Yesterday. What'd you get out of that? What was that like? What'd you pick up from that? That's amazing.
Well, I watched them as they came on.
Right.
Every Sunday. And
then you double binge.
Right. So I more so wanted to when you watch it the first time, you're more so just watching it for Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
You're watching it for how they frame it around Jordan. But I wanted to rewatch it and look at the compliments and how they framed the documentary. I thought that we spoke about it the last time. I thought they do a great job of aligning both storylines. So if we go to episode 9 and 10, you get to see the importance of Steve Kerr. And why Steve Kerr is important is because of the big shot that he makes in the 97 finals.
Right.
To win the series. And why he's important is because it shows the connection of him and Michael Jordan and how he viewed his role comparable to John Paxson.
Yes.
Where did he fit in? And when he actually came to the Bulls, which is 93, 94, John is there, but more so as a guide for Steve. And he says, when you play with Michael Jordan, Jordan has to trust you. He has to know that in your role, you're not going to be as good as him.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not possible.
Right.
But in your role, are you consistent? He has to know that he can rely on you to do that consistently.
Mm-hmm.
So in that space and how they're framing this, then they bring up how he developed as a player. They bring up his father's experience not only as a professor, but in contributing to overseas matters and him actually being killed. That moment, that experience of being a young player and having to build into who you became. The same thing happened to Michael Jordan, but in a different way. They never spoke about it, but that trust. How can I establish myself in this powerhouse that is the Bulls? I thought that the documentary did a great job of connecting those type of stories, not just with Steve, but you mentioned Scotty and why he's important to this whole narrative.
Mm-hmm.
His whole trajectory as a basketball player, coming from Central Arkansas, then being drafted so highly touted the way that he was, out of nowhere, but he's a lottery pick, top 7 pick. He's coming in thinking he's going to be the best player in the league, or the best player on the team, and then he realizes I'm not Michael Jordan.
Right.
So I got to get in where I fit in. But he's so important, so intricate to what became the way they tied it. I just thought that they did that throughout the documentary really, really well. And when I watched it again yesterday, I really liked the way they framed everything.
Yeah, because the time, I could see how sometimes the timing might throw some people off if you aren't
if you're not paying attention. If
right.
you're not paying attention, you don't see.
Right.
But it starts from the beginning of 98 and the beginning of 84. Well, not 84, but the beginning of Michael Jordan.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's almost to the point where you can see the 97 flu game, like they're leading up to that. You get to that point almost at the same time. So when they're speaking about 97 and going through that season, getting to the flu game, watching what Michael Jordan became. Well, not became, but watching what he actually did in that moment against the Utah Jazz team that had just gotten to the finals for the first time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now they played them. So then you come to the next year, which is Bulls playing Indiana, having to overcome that team who's chomping at the bits to get to the finals,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Get through that, and now who did they face again? The Utah Jazz. So just seeing how they were able to build up at the same time and reach certain points at the same time. I thought, like, again, I think that this documentary is one of the best that I've seen.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was talking with my mother about it. See, Mom, I told you I'd mention you in these things. Now you're famous like Isaiah and myself. So
Right.
gotta give the shout out. But the I went to the University of Iowa, and we used to joke because it's about 2-3 hour drive from Iowa City to Chicago, and Iowa doesn't. It's not big enough to have a pro team, so college basketball is very big. But there are also a lot of people from Chicago there. We used to joke that it was University of Iowa, Chicago suburbs campus. So I had Michael Jordan Bulls in my face all the time, and I grew up in New York. I went to high school in Brooklyn, New York Knicks fan. Back then, it wasn't the badge of shame that it is now. It wasn't a complete soul-crushing embarrassment like it is now in 2020, if you catch my drift. And so, I was a Knicks fan and a real one. And I had this Bulls stuff in my face all the time. I remember like, man, I will be happy when this is over. It'll be great when Jordan's done and it's all over. And now, I wish they had done another year or two. I wish they had been able to get out of their own way and not have, the flawed human psyche or whatever artistic philosophical term you want getting in the way and all the personalities messing it up. It wasn't the coaching. It wasn't the talent. It wasn't the skill. The Bulls in '98 were a veteran team, right? They didn't make a lot of stupid mistakes. Did they make any? Right? Even their role players were really bright. And like my Will Purdue's job was to be 7'1", 270. And he was very good at that. And he's a pro when it came to being.
You couldn't mess that up.
You couldn't mess that up. And Purdue, to his credit, he did that. So I mean, it was all there. They were a veteran team. Jordan wasn't making posters back by then. He was jump shooting them, and he threw down some dunks, but he wasn't Air Jordan necessarily.
He was more so psychologically.
Yes.
And from a crafty standpoint.
Very crafty. Good word to use. And so it was, now I wish they had done more. But it's funny, I brought up Will Purdue, and I don't know if you know this. It was mentioned very quickly on I think Zach Lowe's podcast. Luke Longley was never interviewed. And Lowe mentioned that he'd heard there was bad blood or bad feelings between Longley and Jordan. And if you notice, we don't hear from Longley. He's not interviewed. Do you know why?
I don't know why he wasn't interviewed, but he did say he has a E60 documentary just about his whole trajectory and his life as Michael Jordan's teammate. And a lot of those guys say initially they resent it. He did say, the initial years with him you resent because he's so hard on you. But looking back, you appreciate how he was because he was very consistent in what he was striving for. And I think throughout the documentary, although he does look bad at times, just in terms of how he handles certain teammates, I think it's more so an era thing and just a generational thing. The way that he pushed players, you probably can't do that with this social media era and how things leak out the way that they do. But a lot of those teammates, they'll say at the time you don't like it. Will Purdue said it. Winnington says it.
Yep.
Joe Klein.
Yep.
He said it. Initially it's hard, but then you see where when you get to the end result, you see why he wanted you to be this way, or why he had to toughen you up a certain way, to the point where him and Horace had a lot of back and forths internally. But Horace got tough enough to go against the Chicago Bulls, or Scott Burrell. Him and Scott Burrell, he's plugging Scott Burrell the whole documentary, right? But when you get to that point where he can play and have a breakout game against the New Jersey Nets, 23 points in a playoff game, closeout game.
Right.
And then in the end, he's playing in the finals against the Utah Jazz. You know, these are things that they had to experience, that level of scrutiny to really play up to his level enough to be on the floor and really contributing at a high level.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that's why it was noteworthy. I'm sorry if I cut you off, but I think it was noteworthy that we didn't hear from Longley, because Longley was the starting center, right? The Bulls always had this 4 or 5-headed monster of centers that could,
there's
basically
three players that are missing: Longley, and that I felt should have gotten more time. Longley, Ron Harper, and Craig Hodges.
Yes, good point. Yeah, and Craig Hodges especially, because those first 3 titles, Hodges you come off the bench, stretch the defense, and your job is to shoot threes before other teams use the 3. Hodges' job was to come out and shoot threes, and that was. It sounds weird now, but that was quite unique. You didn't have that. You see those.
They have multiple shooters.
Yes.
They were like the only team that had multiple shooters at that time. You got Hodges, BJ, and Paxson as shooters.
Right.
Then eventually they ended up getting, for the second three-peat, they didn't have as many shooters as that first three-peat. But you might only have one guy on your team that could really shoot. You know, Cleveland had two for like 2 years. They had Kerr and Price, but Kerr couldn't play as much as Price did. So you didn't really see Kerr as much on Cleveland.
Right.
You know,
Elo was a shooter, but he wasn't a 3-point shooter.
Right.
He was your jump shooting guard.
Right. You know, so you didn't really see. You only saw one specialist per team, really. You know, so to your point, that's very true.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You're right with Craig Hodges. That's a name that you dusted off, a name I hadn't thought of in a while. But you're 100% correct, because Hodges, that was his role, and he did it. And we didn't hear from him even once. We heard from Harper a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, literally, and you only hear Ron Harper speak when they speak about the Cleveland '89 series. He doesn't speak.
That's right.
During his run as the starting
point guard for 3 titles, and Longley was the center. He started, and it's not like Longley started, played 10 minutes, and you never saw him again. Right. He would play real minutes. He'd play crunch time minutes. He played more than Bill Wennington.
Right.
You know, not to rag on Bill Wennington. He was a serviceable part in that club. But Longley had a career after the Bulls. He played for other clubs.
Right. Phoenix.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it was a little odd. But yeah, Longley, Hodges, and Harper. Yeah, that would be interesting to know why it might have been just logistics, but I doubt it. In today's world, you could you could do a lot of things to get people to talk. But that was one of those things that was a little strange. I was waiting to hear. I'm like, because Wennington looks really different. He looks like a biker, like he's part of a biker gang now. But and see, like, how's Longley doing? What's he look like? And we never heard from him.
Do you think they did just to wrap up? Do you think that they did a great job of giving us a well-rounded story, or do you think that it was one-sided in some respects? How did you feel they canvassed the story?
I think they did an excellent job. Actually, it could have very easily been, here's Michael Jordan's ego on display for 10 episodes. And we're going to ram it down your throat, and you're going to love it, and don't ask any questions.
Right. Which people would have accepted.
Yes. Yeah.
It would have accepted because of the timing of us not having sports, period. I think regardless of what would have came out, people would have accepted.
Yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised. Everybody was. The dirty secret is I wasn't watching the series. I binged like you did all 10 yesterday. I binged the first 6.
Okay.
I hadn't been watching it, and other people were talking about it. A friend of mine was mentioning it, and I can talk basketball with anybody. So he was talking to me about the documentary. I hadn't seen 1 second of it, and I'm able to talk about it because I was a basketball fan during that era. And then I was really pleasantly surprised. I mean, think about it. It's a Michael Jordan production, and they bring up the gambling. They bring up baseball. They bring up coaching changes. You know, it's not just a sugarcoating, very saccharine, you know, high fructose corn syrup, schmaltz lathered over for the proles. They
Right.
actually, I thought, did a exceedingly good job. I was pleasantly, I want more. I would love to see and would watch, maybe even pay for a 2.5 hour. Maybe we should make it a 2-hour documentary on the 1993, 1994 Bulls.
You know, what happens, to your
That would
point,
be interesting.
what's going to change? This changes the standard of how documentaries are going to be made now.
Mm-hmm.
I think prior to this, we spoke about this off camera, but the OJ Made in America 30 for 30, that was a 5-part documentary that ended up winning an Emmy. It was,
Mm-hmm.
you know, groundbreaking. But
Yes.
I think going forward in terms of access to teams and, you know, just being able to frame a storyline, they're going to make documentaries very similar to this going forward, because
Mm-hmm.
you get to see the ins and outs. I don't think they did enough. If I do have any pushback a little bit, I don't think they did enough behind the scenes footage for the '98 season. They did do behind the scenes footage for other
Yes.
years.
Right.
They have all of that.
Yep.
But just in terms of the '98 season itself,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't tie that in. But I think for them it was more so about tying in everything. So they did do that. But you know, you look at teams like the Warriors that just passed, or even the Spurs of their 20 years. You mentioned
Mm-hmm.
the Bulls '94. We could do something like that. Um, Teams, not just a team, but there's an audience in which everyone wants to see, how did they make this work? What's the dynamic between these two? You look at Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's going to be talking about that team that never was. They never won a chip, but they're just as
Yes.
good as any team that never won a chip.
Right.
People want to know the Kevin and Russell dynamic. Is still on people's minds. So there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a niche there that's going to change because of this documentary.
Yeah. And I think you're right. It's raised the bar. I enjoyed it. I really liked it that they ended it with that same clip from
Mm-hmm.
Michael Jordan. It was a
Right,
little bit before he got drafted. He still has you hear him talk. He still had the Southern accent.
right.
He
He's fresh
sounded
out
like,
of North Carolina all the way.
yes, he sounded like a young man from South Carolina with that Southern twang. Like, I want to just do well for the club. You know, I want to
Ho-
win.
Hopefully, we
Happy to
can
be
be as
here.
respectable as the Philadelphia 76ers.
Yes,
People
yes,
forget that that's a team that went to the finals 4 times in six
yes.
years.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, and only won one. They pick up Moses,
one
who takes them to the promised land, and that Dr. J, Andrew Toney, Mo Cheeks. I grew up with those guys, Moses, Dr. J. Like,
time.
and for Jordan to say it like that with a kind of an innocent sound, and to end it like that, I hope we can be like the Sixers and the Celtics, and that was fantastic. That was,
Right,
I was thinking, how are they going to end this?
right.
So it's not necessarily, you know, sugary and like you don't need a nice neat bow. It's too well done to be, you don't want to offend your audience with some
Mm,
nonsense.
right.
But I didn't expect that. That was perfect. Because that was one of my favorite parts of it. Like, here's a young man who wants to excel, and he sounds kind of like a country bumpkin, and it's Michael Jordan.
And
It's
look at
hard
what,
to believe.
but think about how far. Look at how far that road is, though. You go from '84 Michael Jordan.
Hmm.
He people can't even imagine what he becomes.
Yes.
He becomes bigger than life, literally,
Right.
as not only an individual, but then in the statement itself, you can hear throughout the documentary, he's like, I just want to come in and make sure that you know, that I establish myself. I don't want to come in just talking. I gotta prove it with my play. Not only
Yes.
did he prove it with his play, but he took it further than anyone could imagine. And the Bulls itself became arguably the greatest dynasty in the history of the game. So
Yeah. That
good stuff
it's
there.
yeah, transition, I guess, is the wrong word. The evolution,
Right.
the by using that time frame, they did it really, really well, which is why that ending was great, with a young Jordan, and the the right before the internet explodes 1998 Bulls, right? And 1984 was a completely different world, right? It was. I'm old enough to remember it. You know, it's really something. It's a completely different. It was a completely different country, a completely different world. And now 1998, you have the internet buzzing, and Jordan and the Bulls end it, and it's right before, like you said, social media and other things changed in the dynamics. I would love to see more. Are there any other documentary recommendations you'd make for people out there, for our legions of fans who want more? Are there documentaries or stories that you I'm going to recommend, like I did last time, David Halberstam's Playing for Keeps.
Mm,
Um, is I'm an English teacher, so I'm going to recommend a book.
right.
Off the charts, spectacular. It's very, very well done. You get Nike, you get Air Jordan, you get David Falk, you get early Bulls, you get a young Jordan with his parents, and it's written by David Halberstam, who's a real historian. He's not a game player. He's very serious. He was a very serious man. That's my recommendation. Lastly, what do you think fans, before we come up with our next video for people to watch, what should they look at or learn about while they're waiting for us to do another video?
If I had to say in terms of documentaries, one of the best documentaries I've ever seen, uh, is Lawrence. It's one on Lawrence Taylor. It came out of maybe
Oh,
2016.
really? Okay. Before we
Lawrence
finish,
Taylor.
tell me about that, because I've never seen anything in depth on LT.
Yeah, it's Lawrence Taylor Life and Times. And what triggered that thinking about that was the 80s. You mentioned 1984, how times were so different. Lawrence Taylor was a player who, in my opinion, arguably the greatest football player of all time. You know, usually people say, you know, quarterback first. That's what you think about. But I
Right.
believe in terms of being a football player and
Mm-hmm.
impacting the game, I think Lawrence, his impact on the game is second to none. He was a transcendent figure, but I bring up that documentary because it ties in the lifestyle and what was happening around this team
Mm-hmm.
and everything that was happening in New York City and just the country in general played a part in why LT was the way that he was
Mm-hmm.
off the field. And
Right.
all of that ties into how, you know, Bill Parcells coaching. You got a young Bill Belichick in there,
Right.
you know. So Lawrence Taylor, Life and Times. That's one of the best
I
documentaries.
will definitely look that up. I will
Yeah,
definitely, that'll tide us over, and our audience, until, because you and I need to do some more of these, and that'll probably tide everyone over. Lawrence Taylor, Life and Times. So I'm going to check that out.
yeah. So I mean, we got a lot to speak about going forward. We'll map out some things, and in the next couple of days we'll get something coming up next week too. So you guys just stay tuned. I'm Isaiah Rhodes. This is Doug Marola, the freelance teacher. Where can they find you at?
I'm very easy to find, right? If you do the freelance teacher on YouTube, you'll get that. I'm at thefreelanceteacher.teachable.com for my online school. And I have a blog called Education Forensics. And
All right, so
it all shows up there.
check them out. I'm Isaiah Rose. You can check me out on Twitter and Instagram at Ask Isaiah, AskIsaiah. Check out the YouTube channel, Ask Isaiah. And for all things sports and much more, be tuned, be sure to check us out and tune in. Thank you guys for watching. We'll be back with much more.
Got it.